this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. Our guest today is somebody who recently came and provided a training to my team of therapists, and they cannot stop raving about her. So I am thrilled to share her all with you today. Jamie Roberts, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here and excited to keep having this conversation. And neurodivergence, it's all I want to talk about. So,
Well, it's infectious for sure. So when I had polled the team and asked what trainings they would find the most beneficial, this was one topic that came up repeatedly. And I had put it out there into the Facebook world, and I got so many responses that I actually had to create my own spreadsheet and compare and contrast. And you got reviews from some of the people that I respect so much in this field that are group practice owners. And I loved the fact that not only are you coming from the place of a professional that is working with this population, but having your own lived experience really brings it to a whole nother level. So I would love it if you would share with the audience some of your background, career climb, why this is something you're so passionate about.
Yes. One, I'd love to see a copy of that Excel spreadsheet. What all of the different trainings are. That's super cool. But yeah, so I am an LMFT in California. And I currently have a group practice called Equilibrium Counseling Services, and we serve teen and young adults, specifically LGBT and neurodivergent teens and young adults. We do a lot of identity work. Who am I? Who do I want to be? What do I believe? Really finding that voice, because each one of those, being a teen, we got to figure that out. If we're figuring our gender, our identity, like we got to figure that out. And then if it's a neurodivergence, how does my brain think? How do I process and interact with the world? And then all of those intersect. It's a really big hill to climb, and being able to figure out who we are. And how I got here is I wanted to become the person I needed when I was younger.
Yeah.
And looking back, I had the most mental health struggles in middle school and high school. Like so many of us. And so I was like, I'm going to go study psychology. I want to understand why people do the things they do, why we can be in the same situations and have different responses or reactions. And in my study of psychology, I figured out it was because I was neurodivergent and I was studying the neurotypicals because they didn't make sense to me. And I had been masking for so long in this level of perfectionism and performing at a level of what I thought I was supposed to be and do, that I was burning out. And I looked at my caseload, and I had been working with neurodivergent clients and was just like, yeah, I totally get these people. I'm a good therapist. I just get it. And then it wasn't until I hit 30 and stuff started falling apart that I was like, I got my ADHD diagnosis. And it made so much sense. It explained so many things in my past, so many things in my story, why different things were hard for me, why I connected with certain people, some of the risk of starting a business that I took. It just made sense. And as I just studied more and more about neurodiversity and learned more and more about autism and dyslexia and different processing disorders, the more it explained myself and so many people around me, that it became my special interest, and it's the thing that I like talking about and studying in my social time, in my professional time. It makes so much sense to me in so many different dynamics. So it's just grown into this thing, and I'm just like, become who I needed when I was younger. Okay, younger therapist, newer therapist, clients who like have been in therapy for 10 years and it's still not making sense. What piece are we missing? And so a lot of my work is about helping educate others, help advocate for others to have that accessibility or figure out what that all means to them.
Wow, what a journey. So, as unfortunate as it is that it was later in your journey that you made this discovery, it seems like you've really made up for some of the lost time, and you've transcended to a point where you have not only created this practice, where I'm assuming that you are bringing on providers that have also had their eyes opened and are doing this incredible work, but you are also doing the same for so many more people because you've expanded. And so many of our listeners are those that similarly probably started their own practices or expanded to a group practice because they had had experiences and wanted it to be transformative. For me, I wanted to create a practice that I wanted to work in because I wasn't finding it. You wanted to be that provider that, you know, you maybe wish that you had had and create the type of environment that was lacking. So reflecting back, how do you feel like you're doing?
I'm pretty happy with where I'm at. I like it. Yeah. My staff all has lived experience where all like we do a lot of art and creativity that's reflected in our space and what our clients are experiencing. I'm so happy with the community we've created and even how that's expanded. Like we're so transparent and open about the work that we're doing. We're making connections with other group practices and other therapists and other allied professionals that it's just like it's making the world smaller. It's making that community smaller of seeing who's also doing this work and who's also living authentically. And I think that's been hard for a lot of therapists of figuring out what is that professional and authentic balance of who we get to show up as.
Oh, absolutely. There's a piece that you mentioned in the training that I'd love to talk about on here a little bit with underdiagnosing, overdiagnosing. What is your perspective on where we stand as a society at this point with ADHD, with the autism spectrum? Do you feel like it's under or overdiagnosed, and that the more we talk about it, is it kind of helping in one direction or the other?
I think we are definitely underdiagnosing right now. And a lot of the neurodiversity social movement questions the medical model, right? And if we look at the medical model or the DSM and we go back to the research excludes a lot of people. And so if we're not included in the research, if women and people of color or different cultures aren't included in who's being observed, who's being identified, we don't have a good idea of what that actually looks like. So then that biases the diagnostic criteria, and it biases who has accessibility or what we're taught about it. So a lot of the things like it's not identified. It's not seen, or we're given a different label because, well, maybe we kind of fit over here. We kind of fit over here. So you're going to have anxiety and depression, and that explains everything. Or maybe my anxiety and depression is a symptom of the fact that I'm autistic. Because when we think of stereotypes, if we think I'm not who you think of when you think of autism, right? Like I'm hyperverbal. I'm an extrovert. These things show up, and that's not what the stereotype thinks of. And the stereotype leaves out a lot of people. And so I think a lot of times with stigma and bias and lack of information, even as clinicians, we don't have a great understanding of a lot of the diagnosis and a lot of the presentations. And I think that's what TikTok has done for us. We've gotten to see inside of people's experiences, and we all had a major life event happen at the same time, and we're all coping with that at the same time. And we went to the internet to find community, and we got to see people of all different expressions and what that
Right.
looked like, and find the commonalities in presentation and find the differences in presentation and finally get that validation. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a lot of people who are like identifying with it in a very new way.
Yeah.
And I don't want to gatekeep if somebody's feeling like this explains something. This
Mm-hmm.
clicks in a whole new way. Like, I
Yeah.
think we should keep seeking and keep understanding and like not see something and just stop right there. But
Mm-hmm.
maybe it opens a new pathway of understanding the self.
Well, I can tell you, without a doubt, a lot of the clinicians in my practice, when we were debriefing after the training, had their own gears turning and were really
Mhm,
thinking about a lot of what you had described and were kind of scratching their own heads. And I
mhm.
could relate to a lot of that. And so it
Yeah.
even just opened up more of that dialogue and got them
Mhm,
thinking in a different way, not only for themselves, but then I'm sure additionally with their clients. And the piece that was
mhm,
so helpful is that not only were you providing up to date statistics and really talking about how to be an affirming practice and a lot of the language, but we all in our practices and as a team
mhm,
have the training and can obviously diagnose,
mhm,
but that's missing quite a bit. And that lived experience was
mhm,
really key. So I'd love to hear more about the assessment tools that
mhm,
you used, suggestions that you have for people that might be suspecting and looking
mhm,
for more information or a definitive diagnosis.
mhm.
Where should they turn? What should be that process?
Yeah. The first thing I ask people when they're looking for a diagnosis, why?
Mm-hmm.
What is the diagnosis going to do for you? What do you want to use it for? What is the purpose of it?
Mm-hmm.
Because there is still a lot of stigma. There are still a lot of barriers. And so
Right.
figuring out, are you wanting this for just for therapeutic insight? Is this for self-confirmation? Is this for academic or work accommodations? Is this for disability services? Is this to prove it to somebody in your family that it's not just a video you saw? And
Right.
all of those kind of influence what kind of assessment or what kind of diagnosis might be appropriate,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because a neuropsych evaluation isn't accessible for everyone, and it's not
Right.
necessary for everyone, but it's going to be the most comprehensive if you
Mm-hmm.
find a neurodivergent affirming provider,
Right.
because there are questions, there are that are a lot of times we hear like the questions are so like 1 through 5, how
Mm-hmm.
significant or not, yes or no. And that doesn't take in the nuance of the conversation, right?
Right.
Because for me, a lot of the stuff, like with the autism questions, if it came to sensory needs, I would say I have more or less low sensory needs. Do tags
Mm-hmm.
bother me? No. Because I realized I cut my tags out of everything before I even put it on for the first time. No, tags don't bother me because I don't have them.
Right.
And so, like, I did not realize that that was already something I was doing. So, if that was asked of me in a coping situation, in a
Right.
assessment situation, I would have said no
Mm-hmm.
because I've already adapted around it. And so,
Yeah.
there might be some things like if you're undiagnosed and you're an adult in your 30s or 40s, we've adapted in certain ways, or it's so ingrained in our already functioning, we might not be speaking up about why this is difficult or what my coping skill is around it because it's so natural in our day to day. So a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
assessments can be difficult in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I would say if you are wanting just like self confirmation,
Yeah.
you can do that with your therapist. You
Mm-hmm.
can do that with there's embrace dash or yeah embrace autism.com has a lot of
Mm-hmm.
self assessment tools.
Okay.
Um, check that out. A lot of them will show like if you're like within range or if it's highly likely or not as likely, and that can start to help people narrow down what that feels like. Read lots of things. There's lots of books, there's lots of podcasts, hear
Yeah.
about the experiences. Start making lists or notes in your phones about what specifically you identify with.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not just the diagnostic criteria is also deficit based. So it's going to identify all the things that aren't working or maybe even how you impact other people. But that
Right.
doesn't necessarily take into account what's showing up in your life or maybe some of the positives of it. And
Yeah.
we can identify positives and be like, oh, because of these traits that I actually like about myself, makes like I fit over here. It doesn't have to mean that it's taking away from your functioning in life to help
Mm-hmm.
like add to is this diagnosis correct for me or not?
Yeah.
Um, what would that mean if you are diagnosed or you aren't diagnosed? What if you get a diagnosis and it's not what you think it is? How would that
Right.
feel? How would that show up for you? And really
Mm-hmm.
consider all of those things to know what that next step would be. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times I talk with people about start like identifying with traits. You can
Sure.
talk about your sensory sensitivity, talk about executive function, talk about being overstimulated, and start describing yourself in some of those categories because that could also fall into other things too, right? I could be
Yes.
overstimulated because I'm depressed, right? And there's just too much input in that way. And so if we talk about some of those symptom clusters, it can help
Mm-hmm.
us find some of the coping skills or the accommodations that way, even if
Yeah.
we don't have the overall diagnosis or label yet.
Right.
Mhm.
So many helpful considerations. So if we take your own personal journey and then your professional journey and now your transition to teaching, what
Mhm.
has that looked like for you? And when did that all start?
Ooh, okay. So I am dyslexic and I
Mhm.
have a hard time writing, and I'm hyperverbal. I like talking. So it's a lot easier for me to have this conversation with you than it would be for me to write a blog article. And so
Sure.
I really like paid attention to those things of what fit for myself or what aligned for how I like to relay
Mhm.
information
I
versus
love
putting my
that.
an expectation on myself that I need to do it this way or that way.
Hmm.
Um, and I started to think about if I'm working one on one with a client,
Hmm.
I can do really, really great work with that one client. And that is so valuable and so rewarding. And I'm still doing that. If I can supervise a therapist, I can just see my clients and I can support all of their clients. If I train a room full of therapists,
Hmm.
now that information can spread to all of their clients and all of the
Yeah.
work that they're doing. So it kind of goes back to the whole who did I need when I was younger? As a
Yes.
younger therapist that didn't know better, what were the things that I was doing that might have been harming my clients unknown to me? And
Hmm.
so, how can I help support therapists who are already doing fantastic work really be able to show up for the person in front of them?
Hmm.
And that's kind of like that trajectory of like, okay, I know this. Everybody else needs to know it. How do I share this information? And it kind of
Right.
just started to expand that way of how can I get that out there
Hmm.
in the most powerful way.
Mm. I love that. Yeah, the one to many opens up so many doors and
Mhm,
opportunities and connections.
mhm,
And I love that you found something that was in alignment when you kind of look at where do I want to invest my time and energy
mhm,
and what is going to be best suited for me so that
mhm,
I can show up
mhm.
authentically. And you've definitely
Exactly.
found your platform. There's no question about it. So, with the training piece and really trying to be that provider that is helping other providers show up in the best possible way. What are
Mhm,
some tangible tips that you would offer to an incredible clinician who is working with a client and has some suspicions and is kind of working with them on their journey to
mhm,
appropriately diagnose? Or
mhm,
what are some things that we can do to be more affirmative and to, you had mentioned in the training, ways that you can potentially structure the space or
mhm.
handle certain situations? I'd love to hear some tips.
Yeah. So, I mean, in this space, it would be paying attention to, I think, starting with sensory needs. What is
Mm-hmm.
the lighting? What are the fidgets? How can you move around in the space? What are your clinical expectations for eye contact or noise or being on screen or not on screen? And how do we have fluctuation in that? And I've had some conversations lately about, well, our rules or our boundaries in practice need to be equal across all clients, but equal isn't equitable. And so we can't apply the same rules to every single person in our practice
Yeah.
because their needs are going to be different. And
Mm-hmm.
so figuring out for me, what are the needs that I can adjust because you're the therapist sitting in the chair all day. And so if there is one of these needs that doesn't work for you because you need everything to start exactly on time, informing clients, what does that look like? What does that not look like? How do you make some of those adjustments so that your
Mm-hmm.
needs are met, but you can
Mm-hmm.
also meet the needs in front of you?
Right.
And making some adjustments that way as appropriate, whether you get distracted by something else or not. Like if me swiveling my chair is going to distract you, we might not be the best fit.
Right.
That's totally okay. Let me help find you the other thing. Let me be being upfront with what your system looks like.
Sure.
How is my communication style? What do my sessions look like? So clients have that idea before they can even come in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like really just meeting the person where they are, joining them there, naming it
Mm-hmm.
because maybe they're thinking it, but they've heard all of the comments online about it being overdiagnosed or people just grabbing onto labels. And so they're afraid to say it. And maybe you naming it, it takes away some of the concern or the fear around something like that, because you're bringing it into the room. And I say this like with the parents of my teen clients, that like, if you don't say the hard things, they don't know it's okay to talk to you about the hard things.
Right.
So like, you bring up sex, you bring up drugs, you bring those things up, because if you're okay talking about it to them in a developmentally appropriate way,
Sure.
now they know they can talk to you about it. And I think same way clinically, if I'm not saying the word autism and I'm tiptoeing around it, the client might feel like it's not okay to say the word, or it's not an okay thing to bring in.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely. And you bring up a great point that makes me think, if you're working with a teen, let's say, and you've done a great job creating that space and allowing for that client to really show up as themselves, and maybe you've come up with some concretes in terms of what they're experiencing, but there's concern about how their parent is going to react to that. What are some suggestions for how you bring the parent into that conversation and approach it?
That's a hard one. I'm very straightforward. I'm very transparent. So I name it as it is. And like, that's not changing anything. We like have more information now. Your kid's still the same. We just have another way of identifying it. This just helps us narrow in on exactly what we're doing. Instead of treating the symptoms, maybe we can get to the core of it and how much faster our work is going to go if we're at the core of the thing. There's also the piece that if my teen is, how likely is it someone else in the house is? Very likely. And so how do we then support the whole system?
Right.
And the whole family in exploring that and what that looks like.
So if a parent is really stuck on that title, diagnosis, label, anything that you have seen that has been helpful to get them unstuck?
It's a great question. I think I might also have the kid step out for some of it, but sitting with the parent about like really digging in, what is the fear? What is the concern? What does that look like? What would come of that? Right? The same question about getting diagnosis, pros, cons, what we're looking for, what we want, what we don't want, how this is going to be used, how it's not going to be used. And then we can work with it from there, but really like helping name it with them too, or identifying it and all, and like not tiptoeing around it, but being like direct with things. Yeah. I don't have like a specific, like a lot of the time we get a lot of teens that are referred to us from like step down programs, because we have groups and we have individual and we have enough clinicians that we can support the whole family. So oftentimes it's like, hey, we know the symptoms of not addressing it, right? The symptoms of not addressing this, or the symptoms of not doing medication, are that your kid is self-harming or is severely depressed. Maybe we just try it and see what the symptoms are or aren't of actually doing medication.
Sure.
Right. And that can be like, I do a lot of like, let's just do an experiment. Let's just try it for a period of time and see what happens if we just believe this to be true for the next month and see how that changes our work.
Yeah.
And if it helps, great. And if it doesn't, we try the next thing.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the pressure off.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you all do as a team to support one another in this challenging work? I'd love to hear how you structure some of that support as a group.
Yeah. One of my biggest fears about going into private practice was being isolated.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's why most of us hire or like expand into a group, is we want that community feel. So that's super important to me. So with establishing that, I like to hyper niche, right? Like my practice is very, very specific. We see a very, very specific person. We don't see everyone and we don't do all these things. So a lot of the people that I hire have a lot of similar interests, right? Because we're showing up for this work. So every 6 months we do have like a team event to build that community. We have supervision together. So we have group supervision as opposed to individual, so that we can keep working on that together. We will see the whole family. We'll have clinicians on our team seeing siblings or seeing a parent and a kid, so that we can keep that cohesiveness. And we'll do group therapy in the set, not family therapy with multiple clinicians there,
Yeah.
so that everyone kind of has their support or their advocate, and we really see the dynamics going on
Right.
to be able to push that. And we
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of community engagement.
Okay.
So being connected with other therapy centers, being connected with doctors, being connected with the schools, so that we know exactly what's going on and who we can refer to, who we can collaborate with,
Yeah.
and going for an abundance, right?
Yeah.
There's on a business side, there's enough for all of us.
Right.
We can't and don't treat everyone. So who can we work with to make sure everyone is taken care of?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's really important to us.
I love that. So we hear a lot about identifying a niche in terms of who you're going to see as a clientele.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to the actual clinicians in your practice, and
Mm-hmm.
you guys really are a specialty practice, do you
Mm-hmm.
find hiring tough?
I only hire when
Mm-hmm.
the right person comes along.
Okay.
So I took a lot of pressure off of myself. What was it? Probably like a year ago, year and a
Mm-hmm.
half ago, of that I do not have to exponentially expand. Just because we're getting calls or we have a wait list does not mean I need to hire somebody immediately.
Right.
I would rather hire the right person.
Mm.
And so kind of like I get woo woo and I'm like, I'm going to put it out to the universe. We are looking for a certain type of clinician. Like, I'm not rushing right now, but the next hire I do is going to be a licensed clinician that's willing to take the one insurance that we have, that works with either the parents or the teens. And so like
Mm.
putting that out there, that's who I'm looking for. And
I
that
see.
person will come along because they know somebody I know, or they are connected in some way, or they've found us. Like I've never had
Mm.
to advertise to hire because I know who I want. And when that aligns, it aligns. And if
Mhm.
it's not time, then we stay where we're at. And that's totally okay too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So, on this topic of neurodivergence, is there anything else that you would want to make sure that the listeners hear to keep their gears turning even after this episode is done?
Mm-hmm. If somebody tells you that they think they are, start with curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really? Like, what parts do you identify with? Oh, cool. What does that mean to you? So I think a lot of the time we get the response of, wait, really? I would have never guessed that. Oh, I couldn't tell. And that can be really like dismissive and hard. And that's like in
Yes.
the general world and in the therapy space,
Right.
right? So if anybody comes out to you in that way,
Mm-hmm.
oh, interesting. What does that mean? What does that mean for you? How does that show up for you? And just being curious. Because I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times people are scared or they're not sure, they don't want to say the wrong thing. But
Yeah.
if you come at it with curiosity, I'm actually not sure what that means. Can you tell me more?
Yeah.
What is that for you? Or cool. Is that like keep going. Keep talking.
Right.
Tell me what that is. And that
Yes.
gives that space to like tell you who I am as opposed to you making assumptions about what that means or what your cousin's neighbor's friend's kid presents as compared to me,
Sure.
right? So we have that. Believe lived experience,
Mm-hmm.
learn from people with lived experience. And I think that's something we've really seen a lot with the last few years and a lot of social justice things about believing the people who have the lived experience, not
Absolutely.
talking over people who are within that community or culture,
Mm-hmm.
but opening up the spaces for them to talk or to uplift that voice or to fully hear it out, I think is really important.
That is such a great suggestion. So I know we've obviously referenced it and I've shared our takeaways as a team, but share with the audience what they can expect from your course.
Yes. So I have a new course that just launched that is becoming a neurodivergent affirming therapist,
Mm-hmm.
specifically around ADHD and autism. Future ones will have more of neurodiversity included, but I wanted to start with these two big ones. And it is 4 hours of a self-led course about language to use, the medical model, pros and cons,
Mm-hmm.
brain functioning, common themes in therapy, how to set up your practice, all these things to really get somebody set up and have a good foundation to provide this good care and not just
Mm-hmm.
be using the buzzwords because they get it, but that they
Mm-hmm.
really know it. And so that is available on my website. I believe there's a link on my website. We have a second one through Kajabi, but I also really like to do live events. So in the new year, one of our goals is to get CE accredited so that we can also provide CEs through our trainings, doing live trainings, coming and doing group workshops. So it's very intimate and personal, like we did with you, just to kind of keep that information going. And everybody learns differently, which is why we did it as an independent course. So we can do it on our own schedules, on our own time, speeding it up, reading captions, so your brain can get the information however your brain does.
Absolutely. And you have a great online presence. So where can people follow you if they're interested?
You can find me on all of the socials at Neurodivergent Therapist. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. We have all of that. Equilibrium has their own Instagram and Facebook, and we post a lot there, like a community board, because we have mindfulness paint nights. We have full moon sound baths. We're having a vision board party in January. So you can follow us there if you're local or you're in California, you want to come hang out with us. We like to do a lot of updates there as well.
I love it. Well, I can't thank you enough for the work that you do and all the information that you are sharing and making accessible in so many different ways. And I know my team is looking forward to having you back for round 2.
I can't wait. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having a space that people can share more information. This is always great to be able to be a guest and connect.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.